Hey folks, David Stewart here. Let's talk a little bit about The Last of Us Part 2. I've had a lot of people asking for my opinion on the game since we've had the plot leaks. I've been asking on stream and a couple of other places, and I've kind of tangentially answered that in some blog posts and just talking about it on stream, but I wanted to make a video directly talking about what I think about The Last of Us 2 plot and the plot leaks and what they mean for the game and maybe for the game company of Naughty Dog, maybe AAA games in total. I have 5 points that I want to go over, but before I get to those, let me say that I played the original Last of Us, but I never really finished the game. And the reason I never finished the game is I just didn't really care to. I didn't find it a particularly engaging game. I found the gameplay to just not be what I really like in a game. I found it kind of repetitive, and I eventually found myself doing the gameplay to try to access another cutscene. And when I didn't really care about the characters or the plot or what was in those cutscenes, I just ended up not playing the game and not finishing it. That's where I'm coming from. Doesn't mean you can't like the game. And in fact, I respect the people who liked the game and have a set of expectations for the follow-up going into this, and that's really where I'm going to be directing my energy towards. You don't have to be a fan of something to understand the problems when a corporation undoes or disrespects a franchise. Even though this is the second game in the franchise, there's a lot of interesting things to unpack here. So if you don't know about the leaks, I don't want to go into all of them here, but this is a game that you actually want the spoilers for. That's the main thing that I'm going to say. So if you're one of those people that's like, don't give me plot spoilers, this is one you actually want the spoilers for because of what's going on with the plot. And what basically happens is the original characters, Joel and Ellie, end up getting killed by a homicidal male to female transgender person bent on revenge. I guess she's like the daughter of someone Joel killed in the first game, and that's basically the plot. Meanwhile, Ellie is running away from Christian cultists who are trying to kill her for being gay or something. So let me dig into this and go through my 5 points. My first point here, and this is a really important one, The Last of Us is not known for its gameplay, but for its story, and that's very important. I mentioned I didn't find the gameplay particularly interesting. Most people that I talk to about this game, they don't even mention the gameplay. They don't talk about how much fun it is to play the game. Rather, they talk about the story and the quality of the story. And while I don't think the story really meets my quality standards as a writer and as a person who reads a lot of books, it's okay if you liked the story. And I don't like all stories, and you're not going to like all the same stories that I like. But it's mostly known for its story, which is why this game leak is such a big deal. Other games would not suffer from a plot leak. Why? Well, because they're focused on the gameplay. The primary thing about those games is the gameplay, not the plot. So a story leak wouldn't matter. That's point number one. Number two, most story leaks for most games wouldn't show a bad story, and that's really what we're looking at. We're looking at a story that's not only bad, but also disrespectful to fans and the source material in a couple of key ways that I'll get into in further points. So usually you're, when you pick up a sequel to something, you're picking up something that makes a couple of promises to the audience. When you add the number 2 to anything, you're trying to promise a couple things to the audience. That's kind of like marketing. It's making a sequel. You liked number 1, you're going to like number 2. So you're expecting the same gameplay or similar gameplay in the same vein, maybe a little bit more developed if it's a game. You're expecting, some characters from the first one to return that you like and for their story to continue and be developed and for you to feel good about what they end up seeing and doing and learning in the sequel. And a plot or a story setup that's in general similar to the first installment. So people are not wrong to be upset that the characters from the first game are being killed and that their struggle, everything they did in the first game, is rendered meaningless in the second game. People are not wrong to feel bad about that. In fact, they're right to feel bad about that. And I would say it's actually totally okay for them to ask for their money back if they pre-ordered it, or if you play it and you receive that kind of story. I think, it's okay to ask for your money back, because at this point, you have to think about what the the game company is promising you. They're promising you more of the first game, and they're asking $60 for it. So if you pay $60 for it and you get something completely different, then you have a right to be upset about it, and really you could feel like you were conned out of your money. It would be like going to, I've used this before. It's like I go down to sit down to have some scrambled eggs, and instead I get balut. I get a pickled duck fetus egg, and I have to eat it, or I can't leave. That's kind of like what they do here. It's a bait and switch. You want to get the things that you were basically promised, not the things that you weren't. And virtually every other game franchise that has a long established history doesn't just pull the rug out from under you with the second game and do something completely ridiculous. But it's happened. There are games that have done that. I mean, you could look at Dragon Age 2 as a disappointment, but at least it had somewhat similar gameplay, and some characters returned, a few of them. It aesthetically looked kind of similar. I think you're looking at something on a different level of bad when it comes to Last of Us 2. But it's happened before, and people are right to get upset when the sequel is a big disappointment compared to the first one. That's point number one. Point number two is the nonsense story that was leaked is probably true. And the reason that I think it's true is that the company did not deny it. Instead, they put out a tweet that was kind of gaslighting, and I'm going to read it. From Naughty Dog. We know the last few days have been incredibly difficult for you. We feel the same. It's disappointing to see the release and sharing of pre-release footage from development. Do your best to avoid spoilers, and we ask that you don't spoil it for others. The Last of Us Part 2 will be in your hands soon. No matter what you see and hear, the final experience will be worth it. Notice what they don't address there. If these plot leaks were incorrect, considering how bad and ridiculous they are, they would just say, what you've seen is not representative of the final game at all, whether in terms of gameplay or story. So please don't judge the game prior to seeing what we actually come out with on release date. That's what you would actually say, is that this is not the plot. What you've seen leaked is false. You can just say that and people will be like, okay, thank God. Instead, try to play it off like, oh, don't spoil the game for other people. It's like, but this is something that should be spoiled because it's insulting and bad. This is exactly the time when you should spoil a story. So it's a little bit of a gaslighting. Like, you're bad for spoiling the story. It's like, well, no, you're bad for crapping on the story that people liked and rendering all of the struggles of the first installment to be meaningless. And indeed, I think that's the point. Same thing that they did with, say, The Last Jedi. So this might be like the Last Jedi moment for Naughty Dog. Point number three, the story as presented is bad. Extended revenge chases quickly become tedious and really almost sadomasochistic. You get tired of the emotions involved with revenge. Revenge plots that take really long times to finish often aren't that satisfying. There's exceptions. There's like Count of Monte Cristo, but he's not chasing someone for the entirety of the book. He's slowly exacting his political revenge over time and in different interesting ways. Post-apocalyptic nihilism has been done to death. We've seen so many post-apocalyptic movies where it's like the zombies aren't the real monster. Of course not. We've seen that a bunch. This story has nothing new to give to you. It's not witty or edgy. Everything that you're going to see from this story really has been done before at different times. And having a story that's about, say, how meaningless things are, because the whole point is like, oh, the cycle of revenge will never end and it's meaningless. I've gained nothing from my revenge. We had that with like Count of Monte Cristo over, like 150 years ago. This is old stuff. There's nothing edgy or new about it. And at the same time, having an ending where nothing mattered. This is a sequel. This is not the main game. Having a sequel where nothing mattered from the first game and in the end nothing changes and nothing that you do really matters. That's actually references towards the story that the entire point of experiencing the story or telling the story was that there was no point, that there was no point to having this story exist. Remember, stories are about meaning. They're not just about how you feel in the moment. And this is something that I think a lot of newer writers miss. They start to think that it's really edgy to have something that tells you at the end about how stupid and pointless the story was. Like, no, that's already been done to death, but also it defeats the point of the story. The point of the story is to confirm meaning and truth to people, not to just have them feel bad at the end, as if there was no point to them even spending their time on your story, right? So they should have expanded what happened at the end of The Last of Us and really gone on to explore the meaning behind that between between Joel and Ellie, and all the little things that were there about sacrificing someone or not. All that stuff could have been developed further and made the story more meaningful than it originally was, but instead they go the opposite route, which is that nothing really means anything and it's all pointless anyway. That's not a good story. In fact, it's a story which references itself as being pointless, and this was one of the things in The Last Jedi. The reason it was so nihilistic and felt so bad is that it was really referencing to the fans that nothing that happened prior, nothing that you liked from the previous 6 movies matters. None of that stuff really mattered at all. Nothing really matters. In which case, why are you watching a movie? What's the point of the movie existing if nothing matters? So it's one of those self-defeating paradoxes. Point number 4. Gameplay does affect how the story is perceived in a game. This is one of the things about stories in games, is that if the story is occurring at least somewhat through gameplay and through the perspective of a character that you're controlling, that does affect how the story plays out. And so forcing a player to do things that they don't like, and this was explored in a game called Spec Ops: The Line, which is actually a game I think is very interesting in that regard. You know, the first people to do subversion are always the cool kids, but after that it just becomes tedious and annoying. So if you're the first person to subvert, you can get away with it and it's cool, but after that it doesn't usually work out. And especially in a sequel, I think sequels are not the place where you should ever do subversion. You need to fulfill that audience promise. So one of the things they do in the later part of the game is that they force you to take on this character Abby. I don't know if she's actually trans. Let's just say she is for the point of this discussion. You take on this person Abby's perspective. So you're playing as Abby, hunting down and killing Ellie, having already killed Joel, one of the other characters from the first game, the main protagonist, I would say, from the first game. So what's the point of that? Well, it's not just to destroy the character, it's to make the audience, make the player who cares about that character, take an active role in killing her. You're making whoever the player is take control of a character to kill the character that that person cares about. All right, this is like a simulation of having to kill your friend, like having to kill your best friend. That's extremely sadistic, and really is not something I would ever put into a game. Now, it might have an effect. This is one of these quotes that you see. It's like, we don't talk about fun at Naughty Dog. It's like, it's going to have an effect on somebody, but that's not a good effect. Like, why would you want to force somebody to have a simulator of murdering people you like? That's not very good. That's not fun. And that's not an experience that anybody wants to repeat, nor is that an experience that most people would recommend to somebody else. You should really play this game. You like Last of Us? Yeah. Well, guess what they do in Last of Us 2? They make you kill everybody you liked from the first game. Woo! It shows a contempt for the audience, and it shows a contempt for the source in a way that actually a movie can't. A movie can show Luke Skywalker being an old, decrepit, nihilistic, worthless sack of crap, but it cannot make the audience take control of Luke Skywalker and force him to be bad. You force the audience to make Luke Skywalker be a worthless sack. You just can't do that in a movie, but in a game you can, and that's going to be pretty perverse. How many people are going to put down the sticks when they get to that part and be like, I'm not playing as this person Abby, I'm not hunting down the person, the characters that I actually cared about from the first game. I'm not doing that. Point number 5. Forced politics are annoying, and they harm a story that's meant for wide audiences. Now, you can do politics in a story. I'm not against that. I think, especially in a sequel, you're building on what came before it, and that, to me, with The Last of Us, I know that they pulled out some kind of, I think Ellie was gay or something at the end of the game. I didn't really finish it. I just know from other people talking to me. That doesn't necessarily give you full bore range to have a story about Christian cultists hunting down gay people in a post-apocalyptic setting, nor does it mean that the audience is going to accept that you have a male to female trans person hunting down and beating up women. That's not That's not something that's going to be palatable considering where the first one came from. Now, if you just made a game that did that and we're okay with most people not liking it, then that's up to you. Same thing if you're writing a book and you want to write a book with a bunch of political themes like that in it and nobody wants to read it, it's okay. It's not a big deal, right? It's not a story meant for wide audiences. And that's not that big of a deal if you accept that. If you get upset that people won't read your book about how bad they are, like I wrote this book about how bad white Christians are. Why won't white Christians read it? It's like, that's not a fair feeling at all. That's a ridiculous feeling to have. But it also harms the story. So a Christian cult dedicated to killing gays in a post-apocalyptic setting where there's been massive depopulation and there's a constant threat of zombies, it just makes no sense. This sort of thing just wouldn't exist. Like, we need to spend our time hunting down the 0.1% of people, other people that exist out there who are gay. Is ridiculous. You'd never be able to find gay people. There'd be so few people out there. And if you did find one, you'd probably just be like, another human being, thank God. And not only that, but I think as time goes on in a post-apocalyptic setting, you'd see a lot more suppression of gays in general because you need to reproduce. If you happen to have homosexual feelings at some point in the past in your little tribal society, you'd probably end up marrying and having kids anyway because that's what the tribe needed from you. So you'd probably see less of that stuff in general. That would be more interesting to me, in fact, than Christian cultists. I made fun of this in a story called Live in the Pod and Eat Bugs, where you were playing a game that simulated, it was basically Elder Scrolls Blades. But you're playing the game, you go to a cave and you kill all the Christian cultists because there's this bizarre, some of these bizarre lefties that are in the entertainment industry really, they project, or I don't know, it's a false idea of Christianity. They imagine that Christians are some sort of violent cult tracking down people who have weird lifestyles and wanting to kill them, which is not. Just doesn't make any sense at all. It makes no sense if you remotely understand Christianity or have any ability to construct a setting. A male to female trans person hunting down and beating up a woman is pretty repugnant on its own because most of us know that that's just a man beating up a woman, but it's also really unrealistic in this post-apocalyptic setting that's now 30 years or whatever past when the zombocalypse happened. Where are you going to get your estrogen? Where are you going to get these hormones? This whole thing of trans people being on hormones and transitioning and physically altering their body to look like the opposite sex, this is a product of modernity. This is a product of the hyper advanced medical technologies of the world and would not exist in a setting that didn't have those. These are artificial constructs. If somebody did have gender dysphoric feelings, they would not be able to medically alter themselves to meet that. It just wouldn't exist at all. So the setting and the characters are incoherent. Therefore, the plot is probably also going to be incoherent. And the plot leaks are pretty minor, but it does point to something that is very contemptuous and not very well thought out by whoever happens to be writing this game. Here's my sixth point. I'm going to add a sixth point onto this, because this is really what it comes down to. Corporations don't care about their intellectual property the way either an actual creator does, or the people who buy the product are, the fans. So the fans and the actual creator treat created properties, made up characters and books, they treat them in a different way from a corporation. A corporation views them as one of two different things. Either one, a way to make money, and this comes from the people who are running the corporation, the shareholders who appoint the board of directors. They're looking to extract as much money as possible from this asset that they call intellectual property, a franchise, right? They're trying to extract as much money from that. At the other side, the people who are maybe making it don't view it like something that needs to be precious preserved. It's something that's living and worth their time and effort and energy, because they put no spiritual energy into its creation. They're inheriting this thing. It's a job. They have to work on it. They're, of course, not going to care about it in the same way the original creators are. This is why as soon as Star Wars got passed off from George Lucas, it became a nihilistic, a hellish mess of garbage. It's because nobody working on it, some of the people working on it probably cared about it because they were fans, but it was inherited towards, the people who really inherited it, like Kathleen Kennedy, just didn't care about it the way George Lucas and other people that were involved with the production were going to care about it. It wasn't their baby. It was just a thing that they could use. And this is the other thing. This is why forced politics exist in a lot of these franchises, is that the franchise basically gets inherited to a new production company that's part of the big corporation which owns it. And they look at it as a vehicle for messaging. They're like, well, lots of people like the first Last of Us. Everyone's going to buy the second one. Let's make the second one about Christian cultists and trans people. It's an opportunity to preach. It's an opportunity to put your messaging out there. And it's also an opportunity for a humiliation ritual, which is to say the normal people who like the game, it's a chance to force them to play through something that is about how bad they are. It's a humiliation ritual. That's basically what it is. You know, this thing that we care about? Well, why don't you watch us crap all over it? Why don't you watch us completely turn it around? Why don't you watch us render everything that you thought important about the first installment meaningless? They did the same thing with Star Wars, and they're doing the same thing with this one as well. So I really do view it as a humiliation ritual from people that are really obsessed with destroying culture and just not really liking the mainstream culture, whether it's gamers or anyone else in America or the West, or even in the East. We see this stuff trying to put its tentacles into Japanese production companies as well. So that's what you got to know. Corporations don't treat characters and stories the way that creators do. They don't care about them. They don't care about them the way that you, a fan, would care about this kind of story. That's just how it is. They're not people, and they're artificial constructs which hire people to do things for you, and the people they hire are going to view the franchise in a different light than the creator. It's either a paycheck to them or it's an opportunity to message towards you. So I would recommend that you don't give money to people who hate you and that you instead take that money and spend it on a different game and wait. And if it comes out and if the plot looks good, I would say go ahead and spoil the plot. But if spoiling the plot makes the game not fun, you have to rethink about what the nature of a game is. I guess that's my final little parting shot here, and this is what some of my other content is. If The Last of Us was really about the quality of the gameplay, the plot really wouldn't matter. Oh, I know the plot. Still can't wait to play the game because it's really fun to play. So anyway, just some thoughts on that. Leave me your thoughts down below, especially if you really liked the first one more than I did, obviously, and let me know exactly what you think about it. And I'll see you guys next time. Don't forget, you can pick up my latest book, Keys to Prolific Creativity. First nonfiction book. It's about establishing your creative process. If you want the newest fiction book, here it is, Eyes on the Walls. Hopefully you've been enjoying the audiobook. Next chapter of the audiobook, it's not done. Next chapter is coming out on Tuesday. Next chapter of the audiobook for this one will be next Friday. So check those out. $2.99, I think, for each of these on the Kindle store, or I think about $8 or so for the paperback. So have a great one, and I'll see you next time.